I'm excited to share an upcoming publication with you that will be coming out probably next year, early 2026. It's an anthology that's sponsored by and co-published by the International Leadership Association. It's part of the Transformative Women Leaders series of the International Leadership Association, and the book is titled Inspirational Women Leaders: The Challenges and Rewards of Religion, Spirituality, Purpose, and Calling in Leadership. I will be including in that a chapter from my doctoral research, which focuses on the reconstituting of self that women leaders experience when they leave toxic work environments. My research focused on Protestant clergy women leaving toxic church culture, but this can really be transferred to other caregiving and sort of empathetic work environments that women leaders are in, and the ways in which that empathy is exploited and taken advantage of, and also those women who have strong boundaries within that work who are targeted and scapegoated because they exhibit those boundaries while also being an empathetic leader. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this reconstituting of self, how it will come out in this piece in this anthology, but also in my coaching work. And so what I'll talk about today is this idea of reconstituting self, bringing oneself back together, literally, kind of assessing one's identity, and also the physical impact of toxic work environments in order to restore a sense of integrity in one's identity, and also address certain narratives that they were exposed to in toxic work environments and how they can rewrite those narratives or reclaim their own narratives once one has left. So with my research, I looked at the in-depth interviews of clergy women and their experiences moving in through and beyond toxic context, workplace contexts. And in the reconstituting self aspect of this, which is obviously the later part of recovery, there were three dynamics that I looked specifically at, which were drawn from the language of the participants themselves. And that includes metabolizing feelings, embodying uncertainty, and remembering who I am. I'll briefly go through each of these, which have social processes beneath each, reflecting the women's shared experiences. And then, of course, anyone who wants to learn further about this, I would invite you to look at my website in the description box below, and also explore some of my coaching programs that specifically work on reconstituting self. So metabolizing feelings really speaks to the understanding of trauma as an embodied experience. I think traditionally in kind of recent decades, trauma was seen as a strictly or distinctly emotional experience or psychological experience, but it really is an embodied experience. It's the ways in which our body informs us and tells us whether or not we are safe. This kind of brings in elements of the fight or flight, freeze or fawn understandings of neurobiology, and the ways in which our bodies tell us and show us through embodied sensations whether or not we feel safe. So this metabolizing of feelings includes finding the truth in one's emotions and no longer silencing one's experiences. A lot of times when we go into that fight or flight mode, we actually don't acknowledge the immediate emotions of a particular event or circumstance. So reconstituting self involves finding the truth in our own emotions. The recovering from trauma piece often requires specific trauma-informed therapies. A lot of people that I work with and coach have, in addition to coaching work and traditional therapies, trauma-informed therapies, somatic therapies, such as EMDR or tapping. And I think those things really draw on this understanding of trauma recovery as an embodied process. Another important piece of metabolizing feelings is letting go of guilt and shame. So a lot of the women I work with identify as empathetic caregiving leaders. They want to do their best. They want to bring out the best in others. And when presented with chronic psychological abuse and toxic workplace scenarios, it's very easy for women such as these women that I work with to internalize the conflict and say, well, what did I do wrong? How could I have fixed this? And for many women, a core part of their recovery process is to let go of shame and guilt and understand that the institutions that one had been a part of were broken systems to begin with, and it wasn't something that they themselves as a leader were incompetent in or couldn't perform at a certain level in. The second important layer to this reconstituting of self is embodying uncertainty. So when women leaders leave a toxic work environment, best case scenario is that they have something else lined up, a particular alternative career path or employer. But in most cases, leaving a toxic work environment does not necessarily include a linear next step. In fact, it's sometimes better that it does not include that to enable time and space for one to decompress and take care of oneself and, again, reconstitute oneself following these kind of circumstances. So the women I've researched and work with as a coach, there's a lot of questioning of self and identity, and questioning of whether the institution themselves, whether it's education, healthcare, or a religious community, is salvageable. Whether one leaves a particular specific context, is it just that context, or is it the overall institution itself that's problematic that one needs to distance oneself from? And then, of course, this seems obvious, but healing takes time. And I think that realization for many of the women involves this understanding that trauma recovery from a toxic work environment is a nonlinear process, and that progress in this sense of moving from point A to B to C with kind of continual growth and change is unrealistic. Trauma recovery is nonlinear. It is embodied. It does not follow a specific roadmap. Each person's recovery process is different. And realizing that is a key part of my coaching programs, which are very individually driven, based on clients' needs. The last piece that I'll talk about here is the idea of remembering who I am. This is a big part of reconstituting self after leaving toxic relationships or toxic workplace settings, in particular, unlearning conditioned responses. So because I work with empathetic women, caregiving women, a lot of us, I include myself in this, bring to our work embedded narratives of people-pleasing, over-functioning, suppressing our own emotions, absorbing others' emotions. Again, being an empath in some ways very much is that. And so unlearning conditioned responses, and particularly this one woman described it in a really powerful way in one of my coaching sessions, learning to take up space was such a core part of her healing process and something that I share a lot with others. Another piece is tending to what I want. I think in the recovery process for constituting self, for women leaders leaving toxic environments, so much of one's work and identity is serving others in a way that diminishes oneself, where one actually doesn't even know or has lost the capacity to know what one wants, what one's own desires and preferences are. I remember a woman I worked with recently who had left a toxic workplace situation, spent the immediate days after leaving organizing her closet and underneath her sink, because for her it was the one thing she could do and make decisions that she wanted in this sort of contained environment, which was really powerful for her. Obviously, she moved on to other aspects and interests, but it was that concrete, tangible nature of putting things in places where she chose, and she had sort of the volition behind that. And the last piece of remembering self is extremely powerful, which is saving and liberating oneself. There is a self-emancipatory aspect to reconstituting self after leaving toxic situations. That self-emancipation is so powerful for women, particularly those with spiritual understandings, or one has a sense that the universe will step in, and oftentimes it doesn't in the ways that we expect. And so for women leaders to really embrace this idea of saving and liberating self is so powerful in one's recovery process, and enables one to make really value-aligned choices, authentic choices moving forward about what situations one will tolerate, and also what situations in which one will thrive. So I hope that's been helpful. A little preview to the chapter that I'll be publishing. I will continue to update people on my social media handles on when that book will be available. Again, the book is called Inspirational Women Leaders: The Challenges and Rewards of Religion, Spirituality, Purpose, and Calling in Leadership. Thanks. Bye-bye.